Hey folks, Brian Martin, the boss man here at Four State Trucks, once again with Top Tech, Michael Forrest. And you'll remember recently, we put on our new gen airdrop deflate kit here on the steer axle. And we mentioned that we were gonna do the bumper and then the 12 gauge lift kit. So we've got these laid out here. That's gonna be the project of the day. We got the lift kit here on the ground. As you'll notice, much like the new gen suspension, we're gonna have to get some paint put down on that and then start going to work here. Michael, all in all, what do you think we're looking at to do this install time-wise?
You probably have a day in the shop. That's counting what you may do, painting your bracketry. Very nice. Everything you need except for a switch is here. Super
excited to see how low our 20-inch bumper is going to be in this deflate position. Rumor was we were going to be within a ½ inch to nearly on the ground, so we'll see if that holds true. It certainly looks like we're going to be in that neighborhood. So
it's going to be close.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll get to it here.
Let's do it. So we're going to take all of our steel components that are in the raw and get those painted. So we'll go ahead and start scuffing up the steel and put some black paint on these as well. So I'm going to take our lift cylinders, remove these plastic plugs in the ports. Each cylinder's got 2 ports. One will be to lift the bumper, the other one will be to retract the bumper. It's just like a hydraulic cylinder. Got our brass and our clevises for the cylinders. This is the end that'll attach to the bumper. Here's our compression fitting for our 1/4-inch airline. We'll have one on each end with an angled fitting on them. Usually start screwing these in, and we may adjust them later, but typically we'll kind of point them towards each other. And here we have a clevis and a lock nut. We first need to run the jam nut all the way down. I'll run the clevis down to the jam nut. Lock them against each other. There we have a solenoid just like the one we did on our air ride. We're going to have a supply from a tank coming in here on the port marked P. There'll be this port marked A on the opposite end. That'll be going to the front port on the cylinders. That'll retract the bumper. And then when the switch gets turned on, it'll move and provide pressure to port B, which will extend the pressure. Now for the supply side, what we have is this flow restrictor. And what this does is it controls the airspeed through the cylinders. You could screw this way in, and it's a needle valve in there, letting air move through very slowly, or gradually thread it out till you get all the way out, and then you can run full volume of air that could pass through a port this small. So I'm just going to run this out quite a ways. I like to have a fast operation, and I'll run this jam nut down to lock it into place. Now I've got a complete solenoid. We're going to mount into the toolbox, add our air supply to it, and our air lines going out to our extend and retract port of the cylinders. Alright, so now I'm going to find a good suitable spot in this box to mount it. And I believe I'll just set it right here below our air ride control solenoid. So I'll position this in here, mark my holes to drill for the mounting screws. So I'm going to mount my solenoid, and just like I did on the air ride solenoid, I'm going to ground the solenoid right to the body of the valve. Now I've got my ground wire on this machine screw for the solenoid. I'll go ahead and tighten this down. Now for this power wire to the solenoid, I've already ran one to my second switch while we were doing the air ride, which I've got fed down right here. So all I need to do is make these wires together. Alright, now my wires are all connected. Alright, so I'm going to tap into my supply line from this solenoid to feed the bumper solenoid. First thing I'm going to need to do is deflate the air out of this air tank. Okay. Now I can safely cut this line. Add a T fitting in here. And one to the new solenoid. Now I've got our supply ran. Now I'm going to run a line to our extend and retract ports of our solenoid to the front of the truck. So now here's my supplied air line. I'm going to go ahead and fold this over and cut this into 2 equal lengths. Now I add a tape note onto each end of each line, marking it as an extend or a retract. So those will be running side by side from the solenoid to the front of the truck. So I'm going to tape them together and then put some wire loom cover over them to protect the air lines from abrasion in the frame. I'm just going to start right here feed line towards the box, and then also feed line forward. A little easier to route it this way. I go ahead and hook these up. I know that A is on my retract. Put that in there. And B is on the extend. Tighten these two fittings up. Now I'll start routing the line across the frame and down to below the radiator. I'll tie it up here to the outside of the frame to keep it away from the heat of the exhaust, but also to keep it out of the way of the belt and the fan blades. Alright, so I've got my air lines ran, and my next step is to start mounting brackets to the front of the truck. Obviously, we've got this truck low to the ground, so I'm going to get my jacks back under the wheels, pick the front end of the truck up so I can get access underneath the truck to mount my brackets, air cylinders, and get those plumbed. Alright, so these are the brackets that'll attach to the rear of the hinge mount and the bumper brace. If you'd had a 16 or 18 inch bumper on here, there'd be a lower brace attached to the frame horn here, but we didn't have it on this truck. So this rear bolt will go through here, this one to the bumper mount, and this bottom hole will be for our cylinder mount, and it'll attach right about like this in here. So I need to remove the nut from this rear hinge bolt and put our bracket on. We'll just mount this bracket with the original bolt, and since we didn't have a bumper brace, I'll need to get a bolt of our own to put where the brace would have been. We'll have another bracket to put on there, so I'm just going to loosely mount that for the time being. I'll do the same on the other side. Now I can remove the two front bolts on each end of the hood hinge bracket. That's where our main bracket with the lift arms will attach. You should know that there are only these 3 bolts that we used to hold the hood hinge to the truck. So we definitely need to put one bolt back in and tighten up before we remove the other 2. Alright, so here's our driver's side hinge bracket. Here's our lift arms, and we have this angled bracket welded onto it here. These 2 holes will line up with the 2 holes in the front of the hood hinge bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and set this into place and feed my original bolts back in. I'm going to feed these from the bottom up. Makes it a little easier to get a nut on there. I'll run these bolts up tight. Alright, now that's mounted, and this is how it'll move, lifting the bumper completely vertical each time. I'll do the same on the other side. Alright, so next I'm going to put the cylinders on. The rear will mount on a stud that we're going to put in this back hole. That bolt does need to be tight, but the cylinder will still be able to pivot on the bolt. And the front with this pin will go into this tab on the inner part of the bracket. Here's the travel that this will take. Alright, so the last piece I've got here of the bracketry is this lower support. It's going to go through the air cylinder bracket right here where your lower bumper brace used to be. We need to fit that on there and get it in position, and then we'll actually weld it along this bottom edge. Now it's directly above the cylinder, so I'll check for clearance. Sometimes you may need to trim a little bit around the bottom here for the cylinder, but it looks like in this case we've got plenty of room. Alright, since we're going to do a little bit of welding out front, we definitely want to disconnect the battery cables from the truck. We don't want to have any of the sensitive electronic systems in here powered while there's a voltage being induced from the welder. So let me take the cover off, and I'll just disconnect the ground cables, every one that goes into the truck. Okay, so every ground that goes in towards the engine or the cab is disconnected. Just to make sure everything's all right, I'm gonna turn the key on. Getting no dome lights, no dash lighting up, so I'm confident that we're completely disconnected from the batteries now. All right, so now I've got my lower brackets bolted to the frame and sitting against the lift brackets, or I need to weld it now. I've got the batteries disconnected, my welder over here. I've got some protective paper on the front of the fender and the headlight. So now I'll go ahead and weld this up right here. Alright, so now we've got our brackets and supports welded, got our batteries hooked back up. While we let those cool before we put paint on them, we'll get some air line and finish plumbing our lift cylinders. Alright, so I'm going to go to my cylinders. I'm going to tie each side together. I'm going to start with the retract side of the cylinder. My air line is going to get tied to the cylinder here, come underneath it, and tie to these lines here, run it to this cylinder, underneath it, and attached to it. So, all right, there's that one. Next, I'm gonna do the same thing on the extend portion of the cylinder. I'm gonna get some large wire ties and tie the line to the cylinder to keep these stabilized here. Okay, so now lines will be secured up here to the brake lines and things on the bottom of the radiator. Here's my lines coming from my solenoid. I just need to find a good center point where they'll attach. And I'll cut these two lines here and connect my T fittings in here, making sure not to mix them up. So this is an extend fitting or line. This is the other extend line. I'll find my airline mark extend, which is this one here. I'll put that tape line into the fitting and tighten that compression nut. Now I'll get my second T fitting.
I need you to drop that trailer that's on.
Hook that to the retract port of that cylinder and the retract port of that cylinder. Tighten these compression nuts. Here's my retract line from the solenoid. Should also note that the T's, my lines coming from the solenoid, I want coming into the center of the T, and the two opposed from each other going to the cylinders being as equal length as possible. That way it keeps a relatively even amount of flow and pressure directed to each cylinder. I'll put the loom cover back over this line, attach the loom cover to these two. Alright, so we've got our brackets all finished, air cylinders all plumbed. Next step is to take our main bumper plate and set it over the truck, get it positioned where it needs to. I'm going to transfer these holes on these lift plates to the bumper plate. I'm just using a black Sharpie to transfer the holes in a bracket to the back of the bumper plate. And I'll pull this plate back off and drill these holes. And these will be the bolts that attach the plate to the lift plate. Now we'll get our bumper plate bolted to our lift plates. Now let's remove our temporary bolts into the truck's frame. There's no air pressure on this right now, pulling it retracted, so when we get it fired up and air pressure on it, this will be constantly trying to pull back so it stays in pulled tight to the truck frame. So our plate's mounted to our lift plates. Got our bolts ready. We'll go ahead and install the bumper on the bumper plate now. Fit it right over the plate. And we have holes on the top and bottom of the bumper that line up with plates, holes in plates. And we use a flat washer and a lock nut on the bottom side. Now, since these holes in the plates are slotted, we want to try to keep the bumper back as far as possible so it doesn't interfere with the hood. We'll just make sure we keep it even top and bottom, and we'll use the grill as a reference line. Yep, guy might be able to get the toe of his boot underneath there. Maybe, just barely. Almost exactly 2 inches on the lowest part of that. Let me try a bumper flip now. Beautiful. That'll help us navigate these roads.